all put to the side for the moment as we welcome in a guy, as I was saying. He wrote a book on the rise of terrorism and radical Islam, I believe, in the Middle East. I've just ordered the book, so I haven't read it yet. But when it comes to Middle East politics and Middle East history, he is a great stop for us. How about it for John Rothmann, everybody? John, I wonder if you could give me your take on things first, and then I wonder if we can just do a little bit of history, because there are a bunch of major misunderstandings when it comes to the parties involved in this latest violence.
This has been a very rough 50+ hours. The brutal, barbaric action by Hamas, the brutal murder of innocent civilians, the slaying of innocent young people at a music concert, the kidnapping of old and young, including a Holocaust survivor, the threat today, as you reported at the top, that if Israel hits back at Gaza without warning, the Hamas people say they will execute these hostages one by one, with a camera filming the whole thing. This is tragic, and I want to start out by just telling you that this has nothing to do with anything more or less than the right of Israel to exist as a nation. Hamas has a covenant. In its covenant, it writes from the Haditha, if a Jew should hide behind a rock or a tree, let the rock or the tree cry out, there is a Jew behind me. Come and kill him. That is the essence of Hamas's philosophy. One of the most interesting aspects of all of this is the complete national unity in Israel. All of you understand there have been severe political divisions in the country. Those divisions have now faded. Benjamin Netanyahu is united with his opposition, they with him, and with the Israeli people, who are determined to overcome this moment of horror. Almost inconceivable. Some have asked how it is possible for a nation like Israel to be caught without knowledge of what was happening. Remember what happened to us on December 7th, 1941. Remember what happened to us on September the 11th of 2001. Part of the game of the terrorist is this. I want to draw a difference too, Mark, if I can. This is not nation against nation. This is not 50 years ago when the Yom Kippur War or October War broke out, when you had Egypt and Syria aligned in a war against Israel. This is a war by terrorists who are fighting it as a terrorist war. If you watch, as I have, riveted to the news reports on every network, you can see the unanimity of distress. And one other point that I think is important. Joe Biden on Saturday delivered a marvelous statement offering the unconditional support of the United States of America to Israel. But the Republicans have also joined in this statement. They too understand. In other words, aside from a few outliers, and there are always people on the extreme left and the extreme right, support for Israel is deep and wide. And so the next few days and weeks are going to be extremely difficult, with hostages being held and the sword of Damocles hanging over their heads. This is a moment of great tragedy. And the Israelis, and I must add the Jewish people, understand this threat, and they are, I believe, resolved in their fortitude to withstand even this desperate attack by terrorists.
Hamas is a terrorist mobster-like mafia that runs Gaza. Gaza is a place that is packed in, I think it's one of the most, populous,
densely populated places
in the world. Thank you. And it's ruled by this group, Hamas, this terrorist group, supported by Iran. I wonder if you could speak to the situation in Gaza and the relationship between Israel and Gaza. Israel was in Gaza, right? I mean, there were actually people living there. There were farmers growing things there, and
there were settlements, Jewish settlements in Gaza.
When was that? That was. Go ahead. I'm sorry, John.
Under the leadership of Ariel Sharon in the 2000s, Israel withdrew from Gaza. They withdrew all their settlements, all their settlers, everything. And the Israelis said, let this be the test of whether or not we can truly have a peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. What we have seen is Hamas, which, by the way, threw the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza in a brutal action. They were throwing leaders of the Palestinian Authority off the roof of buildings.
Explain what the Palestinian Authority is.
The Palestinian Authority, which is led by Mahmoud Abbas, leads at this moment the West Bank. Israel seized in 1967 as a result of a war of aggression by Egypt and Jordan. They seized the West Bank from Jordan and Gaza, which was controlled by Egypt. These two areas, Israel was willing to compromise, make a deal, and you will recall the peace treaty or the agreement that was signed between Israel and Egypt, which opened up the door to a peace agreement between Israel and Jordan, which opened up the agreement for the United Arab Emirates and, well, actually the Abraham Accords, so that there is now a modicum, if you will, of relations. And we're on the verge of an agreement. The United States is brokering the agreement with Saudi Arabia. What Hamas has done is to break all lines of possibility for peace. And may I point out, the real culprit may well be Iran, for Hamas could not do what it is doing without Iran. And there is no doubt about the culpability of Iran, which, by the way, underlines why the Israelis were so concerned about Iran having a nuclear capability. Can you imagine what the situation would be today if Iran had a nuclear bomb? And you opened with something that is equally important that involves Iran. Lebanon is really a fiction, and Hezbollah, headed by Nasrallah, is in charge of southern Lebanon. They have over 150,000 missiles aimed at Israel. And the fear, and you just described it, is that Israel will have to fight a two-front war. That is, that with Iran's consent, Nasrallah, Hezbollah, will let those missiles fly. And if they do, the Israelis are in frankly, deep distress. Iron Dome works, but not when it's confronted with innumerable missiles flying their way. And there is another question. If elections were held on the West Bank, we know that Hamas would win. Will Hamas now on the West Bank organize those kinds of demonstrations against Israel? And what does it mean for Arabs inside of Israel? Will they prove to be a fifth column? There are so many variables and possibilities. One of the most important things to come out of this, Mark, is the vulnerability of Israel and the determination of Hamas, not just to hit Israelis, but to hit Jews. And I want to point out to you that around the world, including in our own country, police are staking out Jewish institutions, synagogues, temples, Jewish community centers, because of a fear that there will be some action against Jews. This is something we need to understand. And if you wonder about why there seems to be, on the part of Israel and Jews, this sense of tremendous fear, you understand it now. Remember what Hamas says. They will kill Jews wherever they find them. And that's an important point.
Yes, there is so much underpinning this, Even the creation of the state of Israel was something that was forged in the shadow of one of the worst atrocities in human history, I'm talking about the Holocaust. And
may I point out, when you allude to the Holocaust, that one of the people now being held by Hamas is a Holocaust survivor. For Israelis, this is something. I listened to Yair Lapid, one of the leaders of the opposition. I knew his father, Tony, very well. Yair Lapid, who has served in the Israeli government and may once again serve in the Israeli government, pointed out that his father was a Holocaust survivor. And in a very emotional interview, which appeared on CNN very early this morning, he referred to it, not because they want to invoke the Holocaust, but because the memory of Jew hatred, which is what this represents, is real. If you don't believe me, do me a favor, all of you listening, Google Hamas covenant. All you have to do is read the covenant of Hamas. They're embracing the protocols of the elders of Zion, the conspiracy theories, their support for radical Islam. All you have to do is take a look at it to understand why this is not a normal, rational war, because what Hamas is waging is an irrational war, not just against Israel, but against Jews.
All right, now to a couple of questions, if I can just,
Sure.
press this, and then I really did want to get into a little history. By the way, just to John's point, the Wall Street Journal reported over the weekend that officers of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had worked with Hamas since August to devise the air, land, and sea incursions. This is the most significant breach, of course, of Israel's borders since that Yom Kippur War that John was just referring to. And I would say this also: you couldn't look at this operation, John, without even reading this Wall Street Journal thing and getting this journalism related to Iran's hand in all of this. You couldn't look at this kind of wide-ranging attack where there was such a tremendous use of manpower and also of arms, weaponry, missiles, and tactics. You couldn't possibly look at that and not know that Iran was behind it.
100%. And now the question is, how will the administration respond? How will the West respond? And we're going to hear a lot about this in the days ahead. One of the reasons why we have sent the Gerald R. Ford battleship into the Middle East with all the appropriate support systems is because if Lebanon, that is to say, Nasrallah, who is using Lebanon as a base, begins to fire missiles at Israel, all bets are off. And by the way, the Israelis are prepared to respond. And the question is, how do you do it in a way which limits damage? Do you know that one of the things that is so interesting, Israel, as Hamas itself admitted this morning, gives warning before they bomb. They give warning so that innocent people can be moved out of the way. And Hamas is saying, if we are hit without warning, we will take each one of our hostages individually and take them out and shoot them, and we'll do it on camera. That is barbarism without any question.
And now to some of the questions that
Sure.
encircle this whole issue. This from Michael D. Has not Israel too committed acts of terrorism in recent years with their violent attacks on the Palestinians? You can call Hamas terrorists, but I see terror committed on each side. Speak to that, please.
Yeah, with all due respect, Israel is not a terrorist nation. In fact, it's been in the forefront of fighting terrorism. The tragedy is that those who fight Israel from Hamas use terror tactics. Israel has never used such tactics, nor would they. In fact, if they were truly terrorists, as some would imply, the question then would be, why do they give warning for women and children and men to move before they bomb? It is an absurd argument. There is no symmetry between the barbaric tactics of Hamas and what Israel has done in acts of self-defense.
I think parachuting into a music festival and wantonly mowing down all of those young people who were enjoying the festival, I mean, literally just shooting them as they ran.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I don't think that there's anything that you can't both sides that. That is a grotesque
There is no
horror.
equivalency. There is no equivalency to the horror being committed by Hamas and Israel.
The Palestinians were going to get most of what they wanted. Arafat turned it down. That speaks to the peace accord that was shaped. And this goes a little bit of Middle East history or history of the region, John. It is true that the off-ramps provided that might have actually been the start of peace, they've never been taken by Palestinian leadership like Arafat.
There was an attempt with the Oslo Accords exactly 30 years ago. And Arafat, who was a terrorist and admitted he was a terrorist, gave up terrorism and said, let's make peace. Tragically, Hamas opposed any agreement even then. And you will recall, Hamas took over in Gaza after the death of Arafat and controls Gaza completely. That's the tragedy. Is there a possibility for peace? People talk about a two-state solution. You cannot, and we've learned this because of the geography of the Middle East. Look how close Gaza is to Tel Aviv. I could drive about 35 minutes from Tel Aviv to get to Gaza, and I did that trip many times. And so you're talking about very narrow areas. Now think about the West Bank. At its narrowest, prior to the Six-Day War, Israel was 9 miles wide. The intention in the Six-Day War, which thank God the Arabs failed to do, was to divide Israel and conquer from both sides. But that is the danger. That is why Israel always speaks about the importance of geography. But I again want to repeat, Israel withdrew from Gaza completely, withdrew every settlement, every settler, offered help to do anything that was needed to be done in order to secure a peace. And what did the Israelis receive in response? They received Hamas and terror.
Sadly, John is so right that this ruling party governing party in Gaza is Hamas. And Hamas does get money, a lot of money, doesn't go to the people of the Gaza. In fact, it goes into the sophisticated tunnels that you've now seen used for this terrorism. It goes into weaponry. Again, I'd love to say, there's something happening there in Gaza that's positive. But the reality is, it's an area ruled by terror. That said, I think there are many who live in Gaza, probably most who live in Gaza, that don't want to live under Hamas terror. But
they don't have a choice. They don't have a choice.
They don't have a choice.
Hamas took the Palestinian Authority, which was ruling Gaza, and threw them out and murdered most of the leaders from the Palestinian Authority who were in Gaza, killing their own people, do you understand? It is a genuine tragedy. Now, let me point out that the odds are, Mark, that before the next time we talk on Wednesday, Israel will take ground action in Gaza. And somebody said to me, why don't they just obliterate the Palestinians? Well, the answer is the war is not against Palestinians. Israel and the Palestinians ultimately have to make a peace. That was the whole point of the Oslo process. But it is a tremendous danger when Hamas refuses not only to make peace, but embraces terror. Don't listen to me, my friends. Listen to the news reports. Listen to the anguish of the parents, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, the brothers. And remember that the Israelis are under the gun. They cannot afford to lose, because if they lose it all.
Amanda is representing, again, an argument that I often hear. Palestine, and we'll get to that in a second, she says, but I think she means Palestinians go through this every single day at the hands of the Israeli government. When she says go through this, I don't know. I mean, just speak to the nature of life. And again, I don't know, Amanda, exactly what you mean. But first of all, Palestine doesn't exist anymore. So when you refer to Palestine, I don't know exactly what region you're talking about. John, can you speak to that? And then the treatment of Palestinians and those in the West Bank areas under Israeli rule.
Palestine, as it is defined today, is ruled by the Palestinian Authority. It is the West Bank of what was the Kingdom of Jordan. Gaza separated itself. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority have been at war with each other. There is no unified Palestinian state. But I want the listener, and I'm happy to respond, to note that Hamas has ruled the Gaza Strip. And look at the mess the Gaza Strip is in. And when I point this out, that Hamas has ruled for years now, more than a decade, and yet look at the result. By the way, there is no moral equivalency in terms of the Israelis. In fact, if you must know the truth, do you know where most Palestinians in Gaza work? They work in Israel. They're paid people who come in and work. They are the ones that are in trouble now, for they cannot cross into Israel. Their source of income has been cut off. And now the Israelis are responding with great vigor. They're cutting off electricity and water and everything, because they're trying to stop what Hamas is doing. Will the people of Gaza rise up? The answer probably is no. They don't have the power to do it. The victims here are not just the Jews in Israel and the people of Israel. It is the Palestinians who live in the Gaza. Hamas is doing a great injustice to the people they theoretically represent.
Here's a super chat. Edward says, what about Shireen Abu Aideh, who was killed by Israeli forces? What about Israel destroying Palestinian homes in the West Bank for their citizens? Speak to some of that, John, if you would.
Sure. What you're talking about is a journalist
Right.
who was killed in the process of covering a story. No one knows for sure who killed her. It could have been a Palestinian bullet. It could have been an Israeli bullet. The point is, that's one of the dangers when you cover a war zone. And that's the simple truth. And those of us who have been in the media understand that. Take a look today, whether you're watching CNN or MSNBC or Fox, all of the reporters are identified as reporters. She was not. Doesn't excuse the fact that she died. But the fact that the accusation can be made that Israelis killed her is absurd. And yes, it is true. The Israelis have used a method that was first adopted by the British, that if a house is used as a place where terrorism emanates, that house will be destroyed. The Israelis have used that method, fortunately, not very often, because the Palestinians generally understand that the only way to have peace is not through terror. The destruction which is taking place in Gaza right now is taking place because of Hamas's actions. And let me point out to you that on the West Bank, which is ruled by the Palestinian Authority, those who oppose Israel are demonstrating. Those who favor Hamas are demonstrating. Nobody is stopping them from expressing their point of view. It's very important to understand the distinction. There is, Mark, I regret to say, an attempt to say that Israel has no right to exist, that all of these problems stem from Israel. Let me point out that since its creation in 1948, Israel has been under constant attack by many in the Arab world who deny Israel's right to exist. I want to emphasize that Egypt, Jordan, and the Abraham Accords, that Israel has developed normal relations with many Arab countries, that it is possible to have peace, but with radical Islam, with Iran, with Hezbollah, and with Hamas, all of whom are not objecting to anything more or less than the simple fact that Israel exists. You want to solve the Middle East problem, they say? Throw Israel out. Destroy Israel. And the
other
answer,
thing,
of course, of the world is no, we won't.
The other thing I would say, John, and I'm so glad that you make these points emphatically and clear-headedly, but and I would say it's always struck me as odd because this is a real plight. If you give people credit, not so much Hamas because they are, as you say, sworn to just drive the Jews into the sea type thing, but if you give the Arab community the credit of being involved in a real plight for freedom, for their own. I'm wondering why there wasn't, historically, through the many decades, any help from countries that align themselves with that plight. I'm talking about, for example, Egypt. Egypt borders Gaza. I'm wondering about other nations in the region that they seem united against Israel, although now, as you say, there have been some peace, both offerings and some peace deals brokered. But I'm wondering, bottom line, why didn't the Arab states in that region, why don't they speak more full-throatedly or allow for the immigration even of many of these from Gaza into their country?
First of all, the answer is that the Arab world for years rejected Israel's right to exist. They fought 3 wars against Israel that were vigorously attempts to destroy the Jewish state. Ultimately, a philosophy emerged, though, that Israel was not going anywhere. And then moderate Arab states primarily Sunni Arab states, agreed that they would live in the world with Israel. As Anwar Sadat said before his assassination, we may not like them, but we recognize you are here and we are willing to work with you. There has to be the recognition that Israel isn't going anywhere. I want to remind everybody that when the United Nations voted to partition Palestine in 1947, they voted to partition Palestine into two states, one Arab, one Jewish. The Israelis accepted the idea of partition. The Arab world rejected it. The notion that the Arab world would accept Israel seemed impossible, but I'm hopeful. If Egypt and Jordan joined with the Abraham Accords and now maybe even Saudi Arabia are willing to establish peace treaties or at least relations with Israel, that leads me to hope that maybe, Golda Meir once said, we can forgive them for killing our children, but we will never forgive them for making their children kill ours. It is the essence of it. Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians, Muslims, Christians, and Jews can live together. But if you are part of an organization like Hamas, which says, no, there is no room for Jews, they must be killed, how do you make peace with somebody like that? And I want to point out, I do it emphatically, listen now to what Israelis are saying. They want peace, even in the midst of the terror that has struck Israel. The Israelis are saying, let's try, let's work out a way. And I believe that ultimately, Mark, is the answer. Perhaps we will descend to such depths that we will have no choice but to rise and create a better world.
I have to wrap up. We're out of time, but just because you mentioned the Saudis, want to underscore what I think is one of the reasons that the timing on this was what it was. There was essentially a deal brokered with the Saudis that would normalize relations between the Saudis and the Israelis. And to destabilize that seemed to be an Iran agenda item. And as we know, Iran was very much behind this. I've just documented it before, the Wall Street Journal piece, et cetera. I wonder if you could speak to the timing of this. They also caught Israel, let's face it, John, doing other stuff like worrying about their government, their protests in the street, about their government, about Netanyahu. So
Mark,
this timing is not accidental.
I think they timed it to two things. First, the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, a war which changed the face of the Middle East, which opened the door, even though it was a war, it opened the door for peace. Remember, the war was in 73, Sadat came to Jerusalem in 77. Out of the ashes of war, there was a hope for peace. But there was another thing, and you hit the nail on the head. The last thing that Iran wants is any kind of agreement with Saudi Arabia. Remember, Saudi Arabia and Iran may be mortal enemies. And our job is to try to create a situation where Saudi Arabia can be brought into the Abraham Accords. I can't tell you what the result will be now because of this terrible tragedy, but I can tell you the next few weeks and months are not going to be easy. And I regret to say we will be talking about this not only on your program, but on my podcast on a regular basis. The whole world is watching. And while we are speaking, I know that Benjamin Netanyahu is about to speak again. I know that President Biden is about to make remarks, I believe, tomorrow. He's meeting now with the various world leaders and congressional leaders. And we in the United States have to get our house in order. This is something else. The House of Representatives is crippled today because it has no speaker. And I want to remind you that and if we had time, I would talk about it with you, that Donald Trump made the most outrageous statement on Friday on a podcast saying that immigration to this country from the South is poisoning the blood of our country. That's a direct quote. Can you imagine a president of the United States or a former president making such an outrageous statement? And then his spokesperson saying this is a normal phrase. Nonsense. And the idea that anyone in this country, particularly a former president, would speak about poisoning the blood of our country is terrible. It is, I hate to say it, the ultimate, because Hamas says the same thing about Israel, that the Jews corrupt us with their blood. I mean, these kinds of absurd statements deserve repudiation by all. We got to watch this week, Mark, and probably by Wednesday, when I appear with you in our regularly scheduled meeting, we will have a better sense of what happens in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, and I'm going to get into the House Representative of Richard Green, who's standing by anyway. I did want to just, we're way over time, but Wes is asking, could Iran have gotten from the Russians this information and intel and then shared it? Israeli positions, there are a bunch of pieces of information. The Russians could have gotten it from Trump, for all we know. There is I saw.
I have to tell you, I don't believe that to be true. Hamas worked hard to assemble what they did. There is no question they received intelligence and support from Iran. I believe that the fact that Russia and Iran are now firmly aligned leads to many, many questions, and that gets us to Ukraine, which we're not going to talk about today. But I can say matter-of-factly, in the next few days, what happens in terms of Lebanon with Hezbollah and what happens with Iran as more and more proof is produced of Iran's financing, backing, arming Hamas, this will become a true litmus test, how we proceed.
Well, and then, as I say, you've got
for having me on today.
I'm so glad we could. And as I mentioned, Hezbollah and Lebanon. This could really widen this conflict to other
100%.
parts of the region. So we'll talk to John on Wednesday. Around the Political World with John Rothmann is his podcast, which he'll produce daily, and you can subscribe and grab it. John, so appreciate you being here. Thanks so much, John Rothmann.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Mark Thompson Show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.